a show that tackles the big issues affecting the BVI and the rest of the Caribbean. Searches for answers to today's big questions and gives viewers a unique perspective on developing stories. Follow the big story with me, Kathy Richards, only on JTV. This show is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands and Digicel, Cyril B. Romney Tortola, Pier Park, and Nagico Insurances, Banco Popular, Simply Secure, and NV Salon, Spa, Nail, and Barbershops.
You value traditions.
Today.
You value music. You value education. Family.
I love you.
Service.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Love, life. At Popular, we're committed to you and everything our community values. For the things you value the most, count on us. Popular.
Stop.
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 Think
Before you act.
before you act.
Think before you act.
Kathy Richards here. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this edition of The Big Story. Today I'm so happy that we're not going to be talking anything. I'm not going to even say it loud. I'm happy to be in the company of Andrea Durant. And I'll tell you a little bit of the history of meeting up with her today. Sometime, I think it was about 2 months ago, or thereabout, I saw a posting by her sister, EC Subs, talking about what she would have been accomplishing at that time. And I reached out at that time to get a little chat with you, but it did not work out as we had planned. This morning, literally this morning, I'm saying I need something other than to speak about today. And Bob's checking my phone, a message from her sister saying that she's here, she's leaving tomorrow, and hey, don't you want to have that conversation? So here we are. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me on The Big Story.
Thank you.
Background to all of this. Let us know about it.
Yeah, so I just finished my PhD at the end of March of this year, and I had researched mosquitoes, so the species that transmit Zika, dengue virus, chikungunya, and because I'm here a couple times a year, normally my work is in a lab where I investigate certain genes that help these mosquitoes survive in different environments. I was like, well, if I'm here, why not collect mosquitoes down here? And so I was able to do a bit of field work down here and get a bit of information about their ecology and their physiology, specifically in the British Virgin Islands, and that was published for my PhD as well.
Okay, give us a little background as to the importance of studying mosquitoes and other insects and the extent of the work that you would have done. I think most of it was done on Virgin Gorda.
Yes. So I guess the first thing is a lot of people typically target the adults, and the adults are the ones that bite, they're the pesky ones, but one of the most effective ways to eliminate mosquitoes is the larval forms. So these tiny little larvae, which are in the water, they're aquatic, and it's really easy to treat water sources that they're found in. And so for a long time it was known that these mosquitoes, the larvae that are in these aquatic environments, are developing in septic tanks or sewage. And that's a really good thing for them and a bad thing for us because our septic tanks are close to our homes, there's open sewage systems, and a lot of people don't really go and inspect those systems. And so the fact that mosquitoes were able to colonize these environments was really interesting because it's toxic. There's a lot of, in our excrement, there's a lot of ammonia and other things that would kill most animals, but these mosquitoes were thriving. And so my goal was to understand how they're capable of adapting to these environments at like a genetic, molecular level as well as a physiological level, and then, overall their ecology. So that's the importance and the focus of it is how we're allowing them to adapt to these harsh environments.
Okay, your family was particularly happy to know that you were able to use most of your studies that you did here to take you to that place of academic accomplishment. Talk to us about that phase of it.
Yeah, that's it. I love animals from growing up here. We live up in Sage Mountain, so I've always been interested in critters, insects, and such. I learned to scuba dive when I was young, so I was involved in a lot of reef surveying and with the Association of Reef Keepers when I was younger. So I've always had that interest in animals and their biology. Just in general. And so when I went to Canada for school, I was able to get into some of that research, and that's where I learned a lot more of the science behind the animals that I grew up with down here.
Okay, and then now you would have studied there, you've taken your PhD and all of that, still studying too, right?
Yes.
Still moving on, right?
Forever.
Yeah, but how does that benefit us here in the British Virgin Islands?
That's a great point. So I think, at least from my PhD work, what I was able to show was a lot of the genes that are important for allowing these mosquitoes to thrive in these high ammonia sewage tanks, as well as genes involved in reproduction, which is also an ammonia involved process, and so it allows mosquitoes to reproduce. And so in terms of vector control, usually for a lot of these techniques, they look for specific targets. So I was able to uncover some of these potential targets to control mosquito populations. I will say that there are a lot of vector control programs already here. So the BVI government has a great vector control group, and they took me around to survey some of the sites and then bug out BVI. And so they're actually very knowledgeable about just ways that we can all control mosquitoes in our area. So you were just saying you had a lot of mosquitoes in your apartment, and the best way is to go out and look for water sources for the larvae, and you can just turn it over, get rid of the water, because typically they're just developing right outside your home. But that's one of the ways. Now I've actually switched to climate change research.
Wow.
Yes, and so my goal is to kind of start to pivot back to ways that I can provide tangible solutions for some of the climate change effects that we'll experience in the BVI and globally. So that's what I'm going to be working on, and I'm working on now. So I've switched to marine animals.
A lot of switches.
Yeah, I'm all over it.
Yeah, you're catching a bit of this and a bit of that.
Yeah.
All when combined is to a greater good.
Yes.
You talk a little bit there about climate change in the British Virgin Islands. What do you see, and what are some of the things that you would recommend that we do to promote a greener BVI?
Yeah, I think for me, most of my knowledge is in the water. And so there's a couple things that are predicted to happen globally in oceans, especially shallow water reefs, but also the deep sea. So increasing water temperatures, high CO2. And so with increasing CO2 emissions, the water is actually one of the biggest carbon sinks for CO2. But unfortunately, when water absorbs carbon, it can cause acidification of seawater, and that affects a lot of animals that need to make shells and stuff like that. And so I think, first of all, kind of monitoring those changes, understanding how animals will adapt and if they will, and if not, you kind of need to go to the molecular level and figure out what genes and what kind of genetic traits are important for an animal to survive in changing conditions. And so that's kind of what I do is, if we have these different crabs or lobster species, which ones have certain genes, turtles, which ones do better and why, and how can we kind of, ensure that kind of persists. Also, if a certain animal can't tolerate these predicted changes, how will that change the ecosystem structure? Are there ways that we can kind of mitigate those effects? I think at a smaller scale, the health of the reef. So, I was chatting with my brother about, when we dig out soil to build a house and the rain falls like it is today, all of that mud goes straight down into the water and blankets reefs, and that can kill an entire reef very quickly. Invasive species, so lionfish, we're looking at a painting right here of one. Prevent really keeping track or preventing the influx of invasive species on the terrestrial side as well as the aquatic environment, because that can really, with the movement of humans, these days. So there's a lot of things that, and then obviously everything we do at an individual scale.
Yes.
So.
On this very platform has afforded me the opportunity to speak to so many people in different sectors as it relates to climate change. And one of the things, and you said you were dealing with, marine life. One of the things that we consistently see popping up now with a high level of concern is the stony coral tissue loss. Mm-hmm. I've learned to say that.
Yeah. It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and your study entails aspects of that?
Yes, absolutely. So, I work with a variety of different animals, and basically the general approach is how are these animals fighting this disease? I go from like the genes and the molecular level of an animal all the way up to behavior and its ecology within its environment, and so there's certain aspects that you can examine to see how they'll cope with it, how we can prevent the spread. So I was out snorkeling recently and did see stony coral disease. I think even some organizations here are going out and treating them with, I'm sure you know a bit about that. Yeah. But from my perspective, it's mostly how is this disease affecting it? How would they be able to fight it off? What certain genes are involved in this? How can we select for these? It's almost a form of enhanced natural selection to help them fight faster and stronger, because corals are slow growing, which is the issue.
Yeah. That's a major issue because of the time that it takes to grow and develop. Yeah. All right. And another thing that you mentioned, you said lobsters. I recall right after Irma, particularly at Anegada, where we get most of our lobsters from, there's a concern that there's been a depletion in the large lobster, not knowing whether the phenomenon at the time was responsible for either shifting or killing or what. But what would you recommend? Because at that time, I think it was being recommended by a lot of fishermen and some people in authority that we cease on catching the lobsters for a 5 or some given period to allow the regeneration or the growth of the younger ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is a little bit out of my, I would like to get into policy and kind of some of the approaches outside of science and how to kind of implement strategies. But I think that what people have to keep in mind is that, when you get a big lobster, it's 3 to 5 to 7 years old, and so with increased consumption, around festival time and lobster fests and stuff, and even conch, those take forever to develop into adults, and so if we really don't have a sustainable approach in terms of how many we're allowing even of the smaller ones to get to that stage and allowing them to reproduce, it can really rapidly cause crashes in their abundances. So even of the juvenile forms eventually, if we deplete the large ones. And so in that case, I think, and I've heard of a couple organizations that were speaking of aquaculture, farming, is always leads the ones in the wild, and be cognizant of that and farm them ourselves.
Okay, so let's go right back to where we started, and that's vector control.
Yes,
we're in the hurricane season, the rainy season of the territory, and we know it's stagnant water and other things that breed mosquitoes and roaches and all of this. What would be your advice to the general public of the British Virgin Islands at this time as we try to stay safe from contracting any form of disease?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Bug Out BVI says in the vector control sector of the government, in that it's really important that you check, your immediate area that you live in, and that's probably the most effective thing that you can do. So bottle caps can house a little bottle cap with rainwater can house hundreds of mosquito larvae. A fresh rainfall, so plant pots, tires, buckets. When I was doing my research, I found mosquito larvae. Someone had cut out a jug to use as a paintbrush and a painting tray and discarded it, and there was mosquito larvae in there. You can find the less pesky ones in urban, non-urban areas like tree holes, but the ones that are a serious problem, the Aedes aegypti that transmit Zika, they're really in really close proximity to humans. You won't really find them in rural areas. So if you're seeing them in your home, chances are the larvae are developing right outside of your door. So go out wherever your septic system is, go and make sure that that's contained. There's no cracks, there's no openings. If it is, you can maybe, if you have access to it, you can throw like some, I don't know much about septic systems, but I don't know if you might be able to throw something in there to kind of kill them. You can call the vector control, and they will
call for advice.
They have a lot of really good products, and they know what they're doing in terms of treating them. But you can, you should stay on top of it, and there's a lot of things that you can do, such as overturning any standing water in your close vicinity.
Okay, and what do we see from you here on?
Well, my long-term goals is climate change research, so how marine animals are going to hopefully cope and adapt to predicted climate change scenarios. And so I hope to eventually start doing a significant portion of my research out of the BVI, and long-term goals would be to establish some research right here from home and get BVI Islanders involved in that research and make a name for ourselves in the forefront of climate change research.
So we are simply hearing that you're coming back
Absolutely,
home.
Absolutely. I feed the muddy.
Well, great. I want to thank you so much for affording us this time to have this very interesting conversation in a time when we need to be paying attention as much as far as practically possible to our environment and the ecosystem and all of it. And we specifically chose this wall, to do this interview, and I want to thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of The Big Story. Happy that we haven't had the cause to talk about. I'm Kathy Richards. Thank you so much for joining us.